The desert was quiet, cruelly quiet, the kind of silence that followed violence. The Apache woman lay half covered in dust, her dark hair tangled with blood and sand. The sun had already begun to sink, turning the sky a deep crimson that mirrored the wounds across her body. Each breath came slower than the last, her chest barely rising. Around her, the echoes of the raid still lingered, gunpowder, smoke, and the faint smell of burning wood. Her people had fled, some taken, others killed. She had tried to crawl after them, but pain had anchored her to the earth. She pressed her hand to her side, feeling the wet warmth of blood. Her vision blurred, the world around her spinning. Coyotes howled somewhere in the distance, sensing weakness. She didn't pray. She had stopped praying long ago. Pride and pain were the only things left inside her. If the desert wanted her life, it could have it. She had nothing left to give. The wind whispered through the canyons, carrying with it the faint rhythm of hooves. At first she thought it was her mind breaking, the sound of her tribe returning for her. But as the moment stretched, the sound grew louder, steadier. A lone rider emerged from the shimmering horizon, his hat pulled low, his horse weary from the day's travel. The cowboy wasn't looking for anyone. He was trying to find shelter before night fell. But when he saw the shape in the dirt, he pulled hard on the reins. He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching against the gravel. The sight of her made him stop. Blood, torn cloth, the unmistakable tattoos of an Apache woman. His hand hovered near his gun, instinct tightening his jaw, but she wasn't moving. And something in the way her fingers twitched against the sand made him pause. He knelt beside her, brushing the dust from her face. Her eyelids fluttered, her lips cracked open, whispering something in a language he didn't understand. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice low and cautious. "You're still here." He checked her pulse, found it faint but alive. He could have left her. God knows, most men would have. The war between settlers and the Apache had turned mercy into weakness. But there was something about her, maybe the defiance still lingering in her expression, that kept him there. He reached for his canteen, tipping it gently against her lips. The water ran down her chin, but she swallowed enough to open her eyes. For a heartbeat, their gazes locked. Her dark eyes burned with both fear and fury. She tried to pull away, weakly pushing at his arm. He caught her wrist, not in anger, but to keep her still. "Don't," he said softly. "You're bleeding too bad to fight." Her breathing came ragged. She muttered something he couldn't understand, but her tone carried a lifetime of hatred. He knew what she saw. A white man, one of the enemy. Still, he wrapped his bandana around her wound, pressing down to stop the bleeding. She groaned in pain, but he didn't let go. "I know," he whispered. "I know it hurts." The sun dipped behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the sand. He couldn't leave her there, not with the coyotes already circling, not with night coming fast. He glanced at his horse, then back at her, torn between survival and compassion. Finally, he sighed. "All right then," he said under his breath. "You win." He lifted her into his arms. She was light, too light, and the warmth from her body was fading. She murmured weakly, her head falling against his shoulder. He could feel her heart beating, slow and uneven. Mounting his horse with her in his arms took every ounce of strength he had, but somehow he managed. As the horse began its slow trek toward the nearest shelter, an abandoned line shack miles away, he kept his arm around her, steadying her every time the road dipped. The wind grew colder, brushing against her face, but she didn't wake again. Hours passed before he reached the shack. He kicked open the broken door, the hinges protesting. Inside was dust, emptiness, and the faint smell of old wood smoke. He laid her on the cot, tore open what remained of his saddlebag, and found the last of his whiskey in a roll of cloth. By the flicker of a single match, he began cleaning her wounds, muttering to himself. When he touched the cut on her shoulder, she gasped, alive again. Her eyes flew open, panic flashing as she tried to push him away. "Stop," he said firmly. "You're safe. For now." She stilled, watching him through half-lidded eyes, too tired to fight but too proud to show weakness. The cowboy tore his own shirt to bind her ribs, his movements careful, his jaw clenched. He wasn't used to tending to anyone, let alone an Apache woman. Every glance from her felt like a reminder of the line drawn between their worlds. Outside, the coyotes howled again, closer this time. He set his revolver on the table beside the bed and leaned back in the chair, exhaustion washing over him. She turned her head slightly, watching him through the dim light. For the first time since the raid, she didn't feel alone. He met her gaze and gave a faint, tired smile. "You'll live," he said quietly. "I've seen worse." Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. The fire crackled weakly, the night deepened, and the cowboy's eyes grew heavy. She watched him until sleep took him. This strange man who had pulled her back from the edge of death. The wind outside shifted, carrying the scent of rain. Somewhere beyond the canyon, thunder rolled, and as she drifted into uneasy sleep, one thought lingered in her mind. She was still alive, but she no longer knew why. The desert, for all its cruelty, had given her something unexpected, not mercy, but a reason to keep breathing. And in that dark little shack beneath a sky full of lightning, 2 broken lives had just begun to intertwine. When she woke, the world had changed. Gone was the endless desert, the pain of sand biting into her skin, the silence of death waiting. Instead, there was warmth, the soft glow of firelight dancing along the cabin's rough-hewn walls. She blinked, eyes stinging from the sudden light, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment, she didn't know if she was alive or caught in some strange afterlife. But then she felt it, the ache in her body, the bandages wrapped tight, the faint scent of smoke and whiskey. She was still alive. A sound came from the corner of the room, the scrape of a chair, a quiet voice. "Easy now," the cowboy said, rising slowly. His face was rough, sun-worn, the kind of man shaped by the land itself. "You've been out for near 2 days. Thought I might lose you." Her instinct kicked in. She tried to push herself up, but pain tore through her side, forcing a cry past her lips. He moved quickly, steadying her shoulders with gentle but firm hands. "Don't," he murmured. "You'll tear the stitches." His touch was careful, respectful, but her breath still caught in her throat. She looked at him, this stranger, and felt both gratitude and fear twist together. He poured water into a tin cup and held it out. She hesitated, eyes darting from his hand to his face. "It's clean," he said simply. "Ain't poison." That almost earned a glare from her, but her throat burned too much to argue. She drank, the coolness easing the fire inside her. "Why?" she finally rasped. Her voice was weak, rough as sand. "Why, help me?" He shrugged, leaning against the table. "Guess I couldn't leave you there. Didn't seem right." She looked at him long and hard, searching his expression for deceit. "You are white," she said flatly. "Your people kill mine." He met her gaze without flinching. "And yours killed mine," he said quietly. "But I reckon we both lost enough already." Silence filled the cabin again, heavy but not hostile. The crackling fire was the only sound between them. He turned back to the hearth, stirring the pot hanging above it. The smell of stew filled the room, simple but warm. "You should eat when you can," he said. "Gonna need your strength." She watched him as he moved, cautious, deliberate, like a man who'd spent years alone. There was no cruelty in him, only weariness, maybe even sadness. Days passed in fragments. She healed slowly, her body remembering the taste of life one breath at a time. The cowboy, he told her his name was Cole, never asked her questions. He just worked, fixing the roof, tending the horse, chopping wood. She'd wake to the sound of him moving about, steady as the dawn. At first she thought he kept busy so he wouldn't have to look at her. But she noticed the small things. How he'd refill her water before she asked. How he'd leave his coat near her bed when the nights grew cold. Sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, she studied him. He carried his own scars, not on his skin but in his silence. A man running from something. She could feel it. One evening, when her strength had returned enough for her to sit by the fire, she finally asked, "You live here alone?" He nodded. "Ain't much reason to do otherwise. Your wife?" She pressed. "Gone," he said, eyes fixed on the flames. "Long time now." She didn't ask how. Some wounds didn't need words. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. She drew the blanket tighter around her, and for the first time he smiled. Just a flicker, but real. "You're tougher than you look," he said softly. "You know nothing of me," she replied, her tone sharp but not unkind. "Maybe," he said. "But I know what it looks like when someone fights to live. I saw it in your eyes, even when you thought you were dying." That silenced her. She turned her face toward the fire, feeling a warmth she couldn't name settle in her chest. As the nights passed, their silence became something else. Not emptiness, but understanding. She began to help where she could, tending the fire, patching his torn shirts, gathering water from the stream once she could walk again. He didn't stop her. He simply watched, quietly grateful. One night, as a storm rolled in, thunder cracking above the valley, she woke to find him standing outside the door, rain soaking his hat. She stepped out, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. "You'll freeze," she said. He turned to her, rain running down his jaw. "Can't sleep," he admitted. "Too many ghosts in this place." She looked at him for a long moment, then stepped closer. "Your ghosts," she said softly, "and mine. Maybe they can keep each other company." He gave a small, broken laugh. Maybe so. Lightning split the sky, illuminating their faces. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of him. In the storm's wild silence, something shifted. Fragile, unspoken, but real. Days turned into weeks. Her wounds became scars, and his loneliness softened into something warmer. Sometimes he'd catch her humming near the window, and he'd stop whatever he was doing just to listen. Other times, she'd find him mending her moccasins where the leather had torn, his rough hands uncharacteristically gentle. They never spoke of love. Not yet. It wasn't something that needed to be said. It was in the way she smiled when he walked through the door, in the way he paused before leaving each morning, glancing back as if to make sure she was still there. One morning, she stood outside watching the sun rise over the desert. He joined her, silent, his hat in his hands. The light stretched across the horizon, golden and endless. "You'll be heading back to your people soon," he said quietly. She turned to him. "My people buried me," she said. "Out there in the sand, I think." "I'll stay." He didn't speak, just looked at her, eyes full of something between disbelief and hope. She stepped closer, reaching up to touch the scar on his cheek. "You saved my life," she whispered. "Now let me help you remember how to live yours." And under that wide western sky, with the wind carrying the promise of a new day, the line between savior and soul began to fade completely. What began as mercy had become something far greater, a bond forged by pain, healed by grace, and held together by the fragile, stubborn beauty of love.